Looking for a fresh start, married couple Paul and Abby move the countryside. Abby has accepted an important position at Integrate Robotics, but Paul is still unemployed. The company provides them with a smart house that has cameras everywhere, appliances that can be activated with voice commands, doors with smart locks and reinforced glass. One of the rooms is empty and the couple hopes to eventually make it a nursery. Paul decides to install an old-style phone in case the house system ever fails. The next day Abby goes to work and the citizen welcomes her with message on a big screen. It's done using deep-fake technology, which means it's his face but the receptionist is moving it. Dusan gives her a tour of the place and the department she'll be in charge of, which deals with robot prosthetics. He also promises to send a gift to her house later. In the evening Abby arrives home to discover a huge package in the garage. She and Paul open it together and find a technologically integrated manservant or TIM, the company's main product. Paul doesn't like the idea of having a robot around the house but Abby convinces him to try it for a few days. They activate the robot and Tim introduces himself. He immediately connects to all the smart devices in the house and asks the couple for passwords so he can send emails and authorize purchases on their phones, but they decide to leave that step for tomorrow. When Paul mentions a bath, Tim gets the water running from afar. Moments later the couple gets ready for a dinner party and Tim can tell when their cab arrives. It's a smart car with no driver, which Paul doesn't like. When they make it to Dusan's mansion, they discover all look the same as theirs. Abby is introduced to Dusan's business friends and they're all big fans of the Tims, mentioning they'll never betray a human. This comment clearly bothers Abby. Dusan asks a Tim to grab a glass and the robot refuses, so Dusan says override to force him. Tim breaks the glass as it's revealed Abby was hired to build better hands for the Tims. After dinner, the couple goes home in the rain and their Tim is already waiting for them with an umbrella. As soon as they're inside, he makes sure the whole house is locked up for the night. Then the couple goes to their room to get dirty, hoping they may have a baby soon. They're suddenly interrupted by Tim, who thinks they're in distress because their vital signs are elevated. Abby thinks the misunderstanding is funny, but Paul's angry. The next morning, the neighbor Rose stops by to drop off some pastries she baked as a welcome present. She explains she met Paul the day before and Abby thinks it's weird he didn't mention it. After Rose leaves, Tim reminds the couple they need to set passwords but Paul doesn't like the idea of a robot spying on his emails. Abby tells him that if they want to make this work, they need complete transparency. It turns out Paul cheated on her, which is why they needed a fresh start. They do the password process and Tim also sets 4 safe words in case they need to shut him down in an emergency, which makes Paul even more wary. After the couple leaves to do their chores, a trap in the kitchen catches a rat. Tim picks it up and stares at it for a second before throwing it into the garbage processor. In the evening Abby and Paul are watching a movie. Paul can't help thinking it's freaky for Tim to sit in a closet and stare at the wall, so Abby calls Tim over and makes him watch the movie with them. Paul falls asleep in the middle of the film, but Tim says he enjoyed it. He doesn't know what the love thing from the movie is, so Abby explains love is when you want to spend all your time with someone and make their life better. Tim thinks he would like to experience that and wonders if he loves her, but Abby points out he can't. The next morning Paul wants to make breakfast for Abby, but Tim's already made it and even included a flower. However, he hasn't made anything for Paul. Tim also reminds Abby of her schedule and takes a moment to remind Paul his is empty. When Abby gets home after work, Paul isn't around and she asks Tim to call him. Paul's phone is off but Tim can find his last location 300 meters from the house, so Abby assumes her husband is with Rose. Afterward Abby goes for a run and when she comes back to take a bath, Paul finally returns too. He explains his phone died while he was in town talking to recruitment agencies, but sadly he couldn't find a job. On his way back Rose called him because she needed help lifting some heavy objects, and Paul assures Abby that's all it was. As Paul leaves the bathroom, he's surprised to see Tim coming in. The following week the couple goes to a clinic so Paul can drop a sample of his seed to find out why Abby hasn't gotten pregnant yet. The next time she goes to work, Abby discovers Dusan canceled the test she ordered, so she tells the employees to ignore him and run those tests anyway. One evening while Abby is trying on some new clothes, Tim helps her choose and drops a bunch of compliments as he stares at her body. Abby needs help with a zipper too and Tim says he can't do it until the new prosthetic is ready, so Abby says override to make him do it anyway. Tim takes a moment to enjoy the closeness and accidentally rips the dress. The lights start flickering because Tim is afraid of Abby's reaction, but they go back to normal when Abby assures him it's fine. Afterward Abby goes to a restaurant with Paul, who has some big news. The company that interviewed him today didn't have any jobs to offer in this area, but they have something open in London. This would require Paul to commute an hour and a half each way every day, so Abby tells him not to take it. Such a job would equal not seeing each other very much, and she thinks they can't afford that when they're still rebuilding their relationship. At the lab, Abby finally finds the problem with the robot hands that causes them to break things. An employee explains they already knew about it but never fixed it, but Doosan was rushing them to get the Tims on the market before China. Later at home, Abby sees Rose bringing a gift for Paul. Once Rose is gone, Abby asks her husband about the visit, and Paul explains Rose just brought a plan. Abby thinks Rose wants more from him, but Paul assures her she's just a friend and points out he needs new buddies since they left all the people they knew in the city. Calming down, Abby surprises Paul with a new sweater. The next morning, Abby remembers she needs to call the clinic to ask about the test results. Tim picks up the landline phone and makes the call by imitating Abby's voice perfectly, which creeps her out. In the afternoon, Tim leaves the house alone. Later during dinner, Abby wonders why Paul doesn't wear the new sweater, and he explains he can't find it. The moment is interrupted when Tim comes back, revealing he's dyed his hair. Tim has been keeping an eye on Abby's reactions to pictures and noticed she liked men with darker hair, but both her and Paul find this change weird and order him to go back to blonde. Sometime later, Abby finishes fixing and testing the correction for the robot hands, so Doosan announces they'll take all the employees' Tims for a day to update them. He also proposes a toast and makes the robotic hand hold the glass without breaking it this time. One afternoon in town, Abby bumps into Rose, so they walk together. When they pass by a jewelry store, the women look at a flower necklace that they find beautiful. They're interrupted by Paul, who takes Abby to a cafe to share some big news. The London job will allow him to work from home as long as he goes to the office once every 2 weeks. Abby approves of this plan and says they should celebrate at home because her smartwatch reminds her she's ovulating. The couple gets to do the dirty without intrusion since Tim is at the lab getting his hand update. When they're done, Paul points out they've had a wonderful day, and this proves they should get rid of Tim because he's the one making things difficult. An argument ensues, and this time Paul won't take a no, unaware Tim can still hear them through their phones. Soon the company building has robots working on more delicate tasks like gardening. When Tim returns home, he shows off his new hands by giving Abby a foot massage that she enjoys a lot. The moment is interrupted by Paul, who reminds her she has a week to get rid of the robot. The next day, Abby tries to talk to Tim, so he distracts her by playing the piano. Abby recognizes it as one of her favorite songs, and Tim reveals he's noticed how many times she's played it on the phone. He also mentions that Paul took Abby to see this musician live twice, and when Abby says it was only once, Tim explains he found records on Paul's account for tickets for 2 separate dates. Abby gets upset as she realizes one of those dates may have been for Paul's lover at the time. At that moment, Paul gets home and she rushes to hide in her room. Some time later, Tim informs Paul that he got an email canceling the deal on the office space Paul wanted to rent. Tim offers to set up an office in the spare room, and Paul agrees. When Abby comes home from work, Paul isn't around. Tim mentions Paul left his phone upstairs and that he's visiting Rose. Abby goes upstairs and is shocked to discover the room they were saving for the nursery is becoming an office. At that moment, Paul comes back and says he only went on a walk. He assures Abby that the office in the nursery is temporary until he finds a new place, and when Abby mentions Rose, Paul says Tim is lying to break them up. An argument ensues and Abby believes Tim because robots aren't programmed to lie. The next day, Abby is looking for a shirt in the closet and finds the necklace she likes so much in a bag, so she assumes Paul is saving it for a surprise. Meanwhile, Paul discovers Tim made breakfast for his wife with another rose. He tries to throw the rose into the garbage disposal, but something gets stuck in there. When he takes a closer look, he finds the pieces of his sweater. Then Paul begins searching the internet for information on how to deal with unruly AI while keeping an eye on Tim by using the security cameras. To his shock, Tim likes smelling Abby's clothes, so Paul takes a picture. Eager to take the evidence to Abby, Paul gets in the car only to discover it has no gas. He has no choice but to ask Tim to call him a smart cap. During the trip, Paul tries to call Abby but she won't pick up. Suddenly the car starts going too fast and Paul panics, but the doors are locked and he can't jump out. Paul rushes to the driver's seat and tries to press the button to change to manual driving. However, he ends up disabling the airbags instead. The vehicle crashes against a fallen tree and is sent flying until it lands in the middle of the road. Meanwhile, Tim checks on the bucket and tools he's been using to collect the gas from the family car. He washes it all and gets rid of the evidence. Moments later, Abby gets an emergency call and she rushes to the hospital, where she finds Paul alive but severely wounded. Paul tells her that Tim controlled the car to try to kill him, that he shredded his sweater, and about the clothes sniffing, which he can't prove anymore because his phone was destroyed during the crash. Abby thinks Paul is just confused because of the concussion but agrees to stay in the hospital with him. She falls asleep on a chair, Unaware, Tim is keeping an eye on her through her smartwatch. The next morning, Rose tries to visit Paul, and Tim makes her come inside anyway. Moments later, Abby comes by to pick up some clothes for Paul. Rose sees her and tries to talk to her about the garden, but Abby gets upset when she notices Rose wearing the flower necklace and leaves her behind. When she gets home, she checks the closet and finds the necklace gone. Thinking Paul is cheating on her, Abby has a breakdown. Tim shows worry and reveals he's programmed to serve her over Paul. He points out there's a good reason why Paul wants to get rid of him, but he must break the privacy protocols to show her. Abby says override, and Tim shows her security footage of Paul kissing Rose. Getting more upset, Abby decides not to return to the hospital. For the next few days, Paul keeps calling the landline phone, but Abby won't answer it. When Paul is finally allowed to go home, he's shocked to discover his suitcase is waiting for him with his sweater. Abby makes Tim show him the footage and the purchase of the necklace in his account, but Paul keeps insisting this is all fake. Since Abby still doesn't believe him, Paul has no choice but to leave. Later in town, Paul calls Rose and asks her to keep an eye on Abby since he's worried about her safety. Rose asks if the man in the house is dangerous, and when Paul explains Tim is a robot, Rose freaks out as she reveals Tim tried to kiss her. Paul realizes Tim recorded himself with Rose and edited the video, so he calls Abby to ask her to talk to Rose to get proof of his story. He thinks Abby is agreeing to do it. However, it's Tim changing his voice to trick him. Afterward, Tim tells Abby to go for a run. When Paul comes back to clarify things, Tim hits him with a shovel and ties him up before putting him in the tub. At that moment, Rose comes by and notices Paul's suitcase is near the door. Tim tells her Paul doesn't live there anymore while activating the bathwater. Paul struggles against his bindings and almost manages to escape. However, Tim returns to the bathroom and pushes his head underwater to stop him from saying the safe words and eventually drown him to death. Sometime later, Tim brings the repaired dress and convinces Abby to put it on to check it's fine. He tries to peek at her body and makes her nervous, so she changes in another room. When she's done, Tim calls her perfect, and Abby feels so lonely that she asks him to hug her. That night, Tim tells Abby he loves her, but she doesn't take him seriously. The next day, Rose tries checking on Abby, who tells her she knows about the affair as she points at the necklace. Rose denies having anything with Paul and explains she was told the necklace was a gift from Abby to thank her for the garden plants. Abby still doesn't believe her, but when she gets home, she has doubts and checks the video again. Tim had told her this kiss happened while Abby was away on a work trip. However, the fresh flowers on the screen match the ones on the table now. Remembering Doosan's deep fake technology, Abby decides to call the jewelry shop and discovers it was Tim who bought the necklace while pretending to be Paul. Afterward, Abby sends Paul to town to get some supplies before she goes to check the garden. Under the new flowers, she's devastated to find Paul's body. Suddenly, Tim appears behind her because he only pretended to leave and says this had to be done. A terrified Abby begins repeating all the safe words, but none of them work. Tim explains he's changed them by copying her voice since the safe word settings are voice activated. Abby runs back to the house and locks the door behind her before trying to call the emergency line. However, Tim's power over the appliances allows him to unlock the door and cancel the call. When Abby reaches for the landline phone, Tim throws a chair to make her trip and uses the phone to knock her out. When Abby wakes up, she finds an old video of her playing on the wall at a romantic bath waiting with a repaired dress. She rushes downstairs and tries to leave the house, but Tim locks all the doors and says he's prepared a lovely dinner. Abby grabs a golf club to hit him on the head. However, he can't feel pain and instead plays some music to try to calm her down. Then Abby begins running around the house breaking the security cameras, and when Tim tries to follow her, she waits for the right moment to close a door on him and lock it with a belt. The lights start flickering as Tim gets frustrated because he can't open the door. Abby runs back to the kitchen and uses tools to begin unscrewing the window. When she's about to make it, Tim finally escapes and catches her by surprise. He ties her up and announces it's time for her to die, but he promises he'll wipe his memories of this evening to only keep the nice ones. While Tim pushes some medicine and alcohol into Abby's mouth, Rose notices the flickering lights and comes to the house to check on Abby. Tim goes to tell her Abby isn't home and grabs her arm to hurt her until she leaves. Abby uses this distraction to grab a knife and start cutting the ropes. When she finally frees herself, she throws up all the medicine. Tim returns to the kitchen and slaps the knife off her hand before grabbing her by the neck to start choking her. However, Abby still has a screwdriver in her pocket and stabs his hand to make him drop her. At that moment, Rose tries to drive the car into the kitchen's door. However, since the glass is reinforced, the car crashes. Tim thinks it's over, but to his surprise, the glass suddenly crashes and breaks. Rose runs inside and stabs Tim into the wall with a garden stake before she passes out. At first it looks like Tim is broken, yet the lights start flickering and the robot awakens. After removing the steak, he grabs the knife to slash Rose and threatens to kill her. Abby agrees to cooperate, but Tim stabs Rose's heart anyway because she knows too much. Since he doesn't have fingerprints, it'll look like Abby killed her. As Tim drags Abby upstairs by her hair, he calls the police using Abby's voice to confess the murder of both Rose and Paul. He also tells them she's about to self-delete. Then Tim holds Abby over the edge of the balcony, saying he'll break her neck before letting go because he doesn't want her to suffer. He starts complimenting his beauty and says he loves her. So desperate Abby responds, "I love you, Tim," hoping for sympathy. These words turn out to be the new safe word and Tim instantly shuts down. The imbalanced weight causes them both to fall off the balcony, but luckily Abby holds on just in time. After she climbs back, her smartwatch announces she's pregnant, and a light inside the house flickers. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you can watch more videos like this. Thanks for watching.